Most people think a sniper's job is to find a target, pull the trigger, and disappear. But during the Vietnam War, one Marine began changing what a sniper could be. Before long, his name was spreading across the battlefield, and the man behind a single rifle was becoming one of the most feared legends of the entire war. Carlos Norman Hathcock II was born on May 20th, 1942 in Little Rock, Arkansas. His family was very poor. His parents separated when he was young. His mother struggled to support the family, and there was often not enough food to eat. So Hathcock did what many boys in rural Arkansas had to do. He took a rifle into the woods and taught himself how to hunt so he could help feed his family. There was no instructor and no shooting range. It was just a young boy learning from the wilderness around him. He learned how the wind could push a bullet off course, how long he had to stay completely still before an animal stopped noticing him, and how to control his breathing so his body barely moved. By the time he was a teenager, Hathcock could shoot with an accuracy that impressed grown men. He had developed a level of patience that most adults never achieve. In 1959, at just 17 years old, Hathcock walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office and enlisted. He was young, thin, and had very little money. The Marines gave him discipline, training, and most importantly, access to high-quality rifles and organized shooting competitions. He quickly stood out and earned a place on Marine Corps shooting team. These weren't casual competitions. These were serious events where the best military marksmen competed against one another. Hathcock consistently proved he was one of the best. Then in 1965, he competed at the national matches at Camp Perry, Ohio, the most prestigious rifle competition in the United States. There he won the Wimbledon Cup, awarded to the champion of the 1,000-yard rifle event, a distance roughly equal to 9 American football fields. Hathcock won the competition outright, placing himself among the top rifle shooters in the country. There was no question that he was a world-class marksman, but winning trophies on a shooting range was very different from fighting in a jungle war. By 1966, the United States was deeply involved in Vietnam, and Hathcock's skills were about to be tested under completely different conditions. Hathcock arrived in Vietnam that same year and was assigned to the 1st Marine Division. Surprisingly, considering his extraordinary shooting ability, the Marine Corps first assigned him to work as a military policeman. He spent his early months running checkpoints and helping maintain order. It was important work, but it didn't make use of one of the finest rifle shooters in the Marine Corps. Wanting to be where he could make the biggest difference, Hathcock volunteered for combat duty. His request was approved, and he was sent to Hill 55, a fire base southwest of Da Nang in Quang Nam Province. This area was one of the most dangerous and heavily contested regions in South Vietnam. He was paired with a spotter named John Burke. Together they worked as a 2-man sniper team, moving through rice fields, thick jungle, and open ground, sometimes spending days on missions. Hathcock adopted a personal trademark, a white feather tucked into his bush hat. In a war where soldiers usually tried to stay invisible, he intentionally stood out. He wanted the enemy to know he was out there watching. The tactic worked. The North Vietnamese army reportedly placed a $30,000 bounty on him, an enormous amount of money at the time, and far more than most Vietnamese soldiers could hope to earn in years. Specially trained enemy snipers were sent to find and kill him. None succeeded. One of the North Vietnamese Army's answers to Hathcock was a sniper whom the Marines nicknamed the Cobra. By 1967, this sniper had already killed several American servicemen around Hill 55 with remarkable accuracy. Hathcock was assigned to track him down. What followed was not a quick firefight. It became a hunt that lasted several days through dense jungle. Both men knew the other was nearby. Both were highly trained. Each moved carefully, waiting for the slightest mistake that could end the duel. Hathcock used every skill he'd learned as a boy in Arkansas and refined in Vietnam. He moved only inches at a time, controlled his breathing, stayed downwind, and positioned himself carefully so sunlight wouldn't reflect off his equipment and reveal his location. Then came the decisive moment. Looking through his rifle scope, Hathcock noticed a brief flash of reflected light. It was coming from the Cobra's scope, which was pointed directly at him. In an instant, Hathcock understood the situation. The enemy sniper had already found him and was preparing to fire. Hathcock reacted first. He squeezed the trigger, and his bullet traveled straight through the enemy's sniper scope, killing him instantly. The odds of this happening were incredibly small. For the bullet to travel down the scope, both men had to be almost perfectly lined up with one another. That meant the Cobra was only moments away from shooting Hathcock himself. It wasn't simple luck. It was the result of extraordinary skill, calmness, and control under the most deadly pressure imaginable. Not long after the Cobra incident, Hathcock received another mission. This one was different and had become a major concern for Marines fighting in Quang Nam province. The target was a female North Vietnamese army fighter known among the American troops as Apache. Apache had gained a reputation that went far beyond normal combat. According to reports from Marines and survivors, she was known for torturing captured and wounded American servicemen. These acts were often carried out in front of other prisoners as a way to spread fear. Over time, stories about her spread through Marine units across the region. She wasn't just fighting the war. She'd become a symbol of fear for many of the men serving there. Hathcock spent several days tracking her through difficult terrain. When he finally got a clear shot, he took it. The mission ended her activities in the area. Marines later said there was a noticeable boost in morale after her death. Knowing she was gone had an impact that went far beyond any tactical victory. In 1967, Hathcock used an M2 Browning 50 caliber heavy machine gun fitted with an 8-power unertl scope to kill an enemy target about 2,500 yards away. That's roughly 1.4 miles. At the time, this was an extraordinary distance for any sniper shot. The M2 Browning was never designed for precise shooting. It was a heavy weapon normally mounted on vehicles or operated by crews to suppress enemy forces and destroy equipment. Hathcock adapted it into a long-range precision weapon through his own experimentation. The kill was never officially confirmed because recovering and verifying the target at that distance in the middle of a war zone was impossible. However, several Marines who were present supported his account. What mattered most was not the kill itself, but what it proved. Hathcock showed that a 50 caliber weapon equipped with a scope and used by a highly skilled marksman could hit targets far beyond the range of standard sniper rifles. That lesson directly influenced the later development of 50 caliber anti-materiel sniper rifles. Today, these rifles are used by the United States and many other armed forces around the world. During one of the most remarkable missions of the Vietnam War, Hathcock was assigned to kill a North Vietnamese army general. This wasn't a target he happened to encounter. It was a carefully planned mission. The general was heavily protected, and the entire area around him was controlled by enemy forces. To get close enough for a shot, Hathcock would have to cross enemy-held ground without being detected. Hathcock spent about 72 hours crawling across roughly 1,000 yards of open terrain. He moved so slowly and carefully that enemy patrols passed only a few feet away from him several times without noticing he was there. During the mission, he ate almost nothing, drank very little, and controlled every movement of his body. The level of patience and self-control required was almost unbelievable. Eventually, he reached his firing position and got a clear shot at the general. He fired and killed the target. Then he began the dangerous trip back through the same enemy-controlled territory, using the same discipline and patience that had gotten him in. He successfully made it out and returned safely. The mission was a complete success. The operation later became one of the most famous examples used in American sniper training. For decades, instructors at Quantico used the story to teach new snipers about camouflage, patience, discipline, and total commitment to a mission. By the end of his first tour in Vietnam in 1967, Hathcock had 93 confirmed kills. In military terms, a confirmed kill required verification by witnesses, making the number highly reliable. The total became the Marine Corps' record and remained the standard for years. By this point, Hathcock was no longer just another Marine serving in Vietnam. His reputation had spread throughout the battlefield. Among American troops, his name was widely respected. Among North Vietnamese soldiers operating in Quang Nam province, the white feather he wore in his hat had become something they recognized and feared. Stories about him circulated on both sides of the war. Some were true, some were likely exaggerated, but together they transformed him from a skilled soldier into a battlefield legend. The North Vietnamese army reportedly increased the bounty on his head and continued sending trained counter-snipers to hunt him. These men were specifically assigned to find and kill Hathcock, yet time after time they failed. One reason was Hathcock's extraordinary awareness of his surroundings. Years spent hunting in the forests of Arkansas had taught him how to notice the smallest changes in the environment. He often detected danger before the enemy even knew he was nearby. making him an extremely difficult target to ambush. After his first tour, Hathcock returned home to the United States. He had married Jo Winstead in 1962, and during his time in Vietnam, she spent months waiting for letters and updates, never knowing what might happen from one day to the next. Like many combat veterans, Hathcock rarely talked about what he'd experienced. He wasn't interested in telling stories about himself or seeking attention, but despite everything he'd already accomplished, his military career was far from over. He later returned to Vietnam for a second tour. By then, he was serving not only as an operational sniper, but also as an instructor, teaching younger Marines the skills he'd learned through years of combat. Few men in the unit had more battlefield experience than he did, and the Marine Corps wanted that knowledge passed on to the next generation. Then, on September 16, 1969, everything changed. Hathcock was riding in an Amtrak, an armored amphibious vehicle used by the Marines to transport troops across difficult terrain. Several other servicemen were inside with him. Without warning, the vehicle struck a large anti-tank mine. The explosion was devastating. The Amtrak was immediately engulfed in flames. Fuel ignited, ammunition began exploding inside the vehicle, and thick smoke filled the interior. Men were trapped inside a burning metal shell. Hathcock was badly injured in the blast and caught fire himself. Most people in that situation would have focused only on escaping. Instead, after getting out, he turned around and went back into the burning vehicle. One by one, he pulled trapped Marines to safety. Despite suffering severe burns, he repeatedly entered the wreckage, dragged wounded men out, and carried them away from the flames and exploding ammunition. He continued doing this until every survivor who could be rescued had been removed. In total, he saved 7 Marines. When the rescue was over, Hathcock's injuries were catastrophic. He had third-degree burns covering 43% of his body. These are the most serious burns possible, destroying skin and tissue deep beneath the surface. He was immediately evacuated to the Naval Hospital in Great Lakes, Illinois, where he underwent months of treatment, skin graft operations, and painful rehabilitation. For his actions that day, Hathcock received the Silver Star, the United States military's third highest combat decoration for valor. He earned it not for a sniper mission or a famous shot, but for risking his own life to save 7 fellow Marines when he himself was critically injured. Because of his physical condition, returning to combat was no longer realistic. However, the Marine Corps recognized that his experience and knowledge were too valuable to lose. Instead of sending him back into the field, they gave him a new mission: to teach others. By 1975, Hathcock was stationed at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia. Working alongside Major Dick Culver and several experienced Marines, he helped create the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. It was the first formal and standardized sniper training program in Marine Corps history. Before the school existed, sniper training was inconsistent. Most snipers learned from personal mentors, battlefield experience, or simple trial and error. There was no official curriculum, no standard qualification process, and no unified doctrine. Much of the knowledge existed only in the minds of experienced shooters. Hathcock helped change that. He took everything he'd learned throughout his life and turned it into a structured training program that could be taught to future generations. The school held its first official class in 1977. It became the model for sniper training throughout the U.S. military. Law enforcement agencies across the country also studied his methods while developing their own precision marksman programs. The lessons taught at Quantico included camouflage, stalking techniques, range estimation, ballistic calculations, observation skills, and how to identify and engage targets while under extreme stress. Over the decades, Marines trained under those principles served in conflicts ranging from Grenada and Panama to Somalia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Many of those Marines survived dangerous situations because of skills that could be traced back to the training program Hathcock helped build. While all of that, a new battle was beginning inside Hathcock's own body. In the early 1970s, he started noticing strange symptoms. His arms and legs would sometimes go numb. He had trouble with balance. Weakness appeared in parts of his body for no clear reason. At first, the symptoms were confusing because they didn't seem connected to any combat injury or burn wound he'd suffered in Vietnam. As the years passed, the problem became harder to ignore. By the mid-1970s, doctors finally identified the cause: multiple sclerosis, often called MS. MS is a disease that affects the central nervous system, which includes the brain and spinal cord. In people with MS, The immune system mistakenly attacks the protective covering around nerve fibers. As this damage spreads, messages between the brain and the rest of the body become disrupted. Over time, movement, balance, coordination, and muscle control can all be affected. There's no cure, and the disease usually gets worse as years pass. For Hathcock, the diagnosis was especially cruel. His entire life had depended on physical control. Now the disease was slowly taking away the very abilities that had defined him. Even so, Hathcock refused to quit. He continued working and teaching Marines for as long as he could. He remained committed to the Scout Sniper School and to passing on everything he'd learned during his years in combat. By 1979, however, the disease had progressed to the point where continuing his military career was no longer possible. The Marine Corps medically retired him after exactly 20 years of service. He left the military as a gunnery sergeant. In the Marine Corps, that rank represents a high level of technical skill and professional expertise. Although he'd retired from active service, Hathcock did not completely leave the shooting world behind. He continued working with law enforcement sniper teams, offering advice and sharing the lessons he'd learned during his years in Vietnam. He also stayed connected to the military community and the world of competitive shooting. Throughout the early 1980s, his reputation remained strong among Marines, soldiers, and law enforcement professionals. However, most ordinary Americans had never heard of him. Outside military circles, his story was largely unknown. That changed in 1986 when author Charles Henderson published the book Marine Sniper. The book told the story of Hathcock's life, beginning with his childhood in Arkansas, continuing through his service in Vietnam, and ending with his role in creating the Scout Sniper School. The book introduced Hathcock to a much larger audience. Veterans appreciated the detailed and realistic account of combat. People with no military background found themselves fascinated by the story of a man who had accomplished extraordinary things while remaining largely unknown to the public. The number in the book's title, 93 Confirmed Kills, became closely tied to Hathcock's legacy. It remained the Marine Corps sniper's record for decades. As the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, multiple sclerosis continued to advance. Tasks that had once been simple became increasingly difficult. The disease gradually weakened his body and reduced his independence. For a man who'd once crawled through enemy territory for days without being detected, the change was painful. Despite his declining health, the military community never forgot what he'd accomplished. Former students, fellow Marines, and military leaders continued to recognize the impact he'd made on generations of snipers. In 1996, Hathcock received the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. The ceremony was attended by graduates of the Scout Sniper School, many of whom had built their own careers using the principles and techniques he'd helped create. The award recognized not only his combat service, but also his lasting influence on the Marine Corps. Carlos Hathcock died on February 23, 1999 in Virginia Beach, Virginia. He was 56 years old. The cause of his death was complications related to multiple sclerosis. He was buried with full military honors, bringing an end to a life that had taken him from the forests of rural Arkansas to the battlefields of Vietnam and into the history of the United States Marine Corps.